Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Religious
Selamat
greetings,
menjalankan
peace be upon
aktivitas.
us.
Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan. Di Australia merupakan kebiasaan untuk
In
menunjukkan
Australia,
hormat terhadap
it is
pengetahuan
customary
dari leluhur
to
atau
respect
tradisi
knowledge, the
yang
ancestors, and the
diturunkan.
contribution of the indigenous
Mengucapkan
people. I would like
congratulations
to
atas nama
recognize
di Australia-Indonesia Center.
the elders
I
on behalf of the
salute
Australian-Indonesian
the
Center.
elders of the many nations across Australia from wherever participants are joining us from today. We pay our respects to elders past, present, and future. Yang kami hormati, Ibu Profesor Dr. Dwi Ariastina Pulubuhu, MA,
I would
AIC
like
Board
to welcome
Member
Professor Dwi
Universitas
Aris,
Hasanuddin, para narasumber
Board Member and
serta
Rector of
undangan
University
yang hadir pada
Hasanuddin,
pagi hari ini.
and all the
Pada masa
participants in this Paris
Indonesia
Summit.
Paris Summit
Welcome
2020, hari ketiga yang
to
akan
the third
membahas
day of the
pengalaman
summit,
muda
which will
dan
be
budaya.
discussing youth and
PAIR adalah
development.
partnership
PAIR is a
antara
partnership
Australia
for
Indonesia
Australia-Indonesia
Development and
Research,
Research Indonesia Australia, sebuah program
which is a
berkelanjutan yang
program
bersifat
of applied
interdisipliner
research, which is
pusat
interdisciplinary
penelitian
and centered in a
di
particular area,
Australia.
which currently
Program
is
ini
South
didukung oleh
Sulawesi,
pemerintah Australia dan pemerintah Indonesia
supported by the
dengan
Australian-Indonesia government and
Universitas
11
Australia.
universities in
Tujuannya
Indonesia and
adalah
Australia. The PAIR
mengkolaborasi
Digital
dan
Summit
mempersatukan para peneliti,
is
pemangku kepentingan,
brings together
pembuat
researchers,
kebijakan,
stakeholders, and
para
policymakers
ilmuwan,
from
dan
Indonesia
para
and
digital
Australia.
memberikan
The
pengetahuan
speakers will
kepada
share their
publik
knowledge and their
mengenai
views regarding
isu-isu penting berkaitan
various
dengan
key issues
pembangunan dan
related to
implementasi inklusif
sustainable and
dan juga
inclusive development,
kedaulatan.
specifically in South
Berikutnya,
Sulawesi.
kami mengundang Ibu Profesor
Respectfully,
Dwi
we would like to
Aristina Pulubuhu MA
invite
untuk memberikan sambutan
the
pembuka
professor,
dan
Dua
dilanjutkan
Aristina,
oleh
to
Ibu
give her opening
Profesor
remarks
Dwi
for the
kepada Ibu Profesor Dwi
PAIR Digital
Aristina
Summit.
Pulubuhu.
Let's welcome Professor
Baik,
Dua
terima kasih.
Aristina.
Assalamualaikum
Religious
warahmatullahi
greetings.
wabarakatuh.
Peace be upon us all.
Selamat pagi,
Good
Om
morning.
Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, dan salam
Religious
kebajikan.
greetings. Peace be
Terima
upon us
kasih
all
untuk
in a
moderator,
diversity of religious greetings.
Bu
Good
Valeri.
morning to the moderator, Ibu
Saya
Valerie.
mewakili para
I'd like
narasumber
to
PAIR Summit
greet
dan
the speakers for
nanti
the Paris Summit
kita
and, of
sapa
course, the
PAIR
participants
Summit dari
of the Paris Summit,
Indonesia
both
dan
from Indonesia and
Australia.
from Australia.
Bapak Ibu para
Ladies and
moderator,
gentlemen, the moderators,
saya hormati
and
para pejabat yang hadir, mungkin sudah ada di sini, tapi baik dari Sulawesi Selatan
all
maupun
the
dari
officials and government officials who are here, both from South Sulawesi,
Australia-Indonesia
from
Center.
Australia-Indonesia Center,
Jadi,
as well as our researchers.
adalah suatu kebanggaan bagi saya
It is an honor
untuk
for me
memberi sambutan di sini
to
pada hari
provide the opening
yang
remarks
ketiga
on the third
karena
day
ini
of
terkait
the Pair Digital
dengan
Summit.
aktivitas
This is related
dan
to
juga
the
namun
pair research
juga
activity.
karena fokus
We believe
saya
this is
di
critical
sini
because the
di
focus
South
area is
Selatan
in South
dan yang
Sulawesi.
terpenting tema
And most
hari
importantly,
ketiga ini
the
membahas
theme for this
tentang
third day
bagaimana
is
peran
discussing
dan
the role and the
partisipasi
participation
atau benefit terhadap
or the
generasi
benefits
muda.
for the young
Ya,
people or the young
jadi
generation.
Bapak Ibu
I would like to
dan
greet
para pemuda khususnya
all
mahasiswa
the
dari
ladies,
Sulawesi
gentlemen, all the
Selatan.
youth, all the young
Saya sangat
people who are
bangga
joining us today.
Sulawesi Selatan
South Sulawesi is very
dari
proud that from day to
menunjukkan
day,
pembangunan yang
we
sangat
are
pesat
demonstrating
sebelum
great
pandemi
development.
ditandai dengan
Prior to
pertumbuhan
the
ekonomi
pandemic,
yang rata-rata
this
di
was marked
atas
by
pertumbuhan
an
ekonomi
economic growth
nasional
which was
secara
above the national,
Indonesia.
the average
Untuk
national
pertama
growth
kalinya
of
sebuah
Indonesia.
jalur kereta
And for the
api
first
Jawa
time,
Timur ada di Sulawesi Selatan.
they will be
Rekan-rekan
are
dari
constructing the railway line between Makassar and Parepare for the first time in East Indonesia.
seperti
It is part of the master plan for the Trans-Sulawesi railway line.
sebagai
We
satu
view this
infrastruktur
as
yang
a
akan
great infrastructure,
menjadi
which
pemantik dari
will be
dibangunnya
a
infrastruktur
catalyst
besar
for the
lainnya,
development of other
yaitu
great
pembangunan
infrastructure,
laut,
which is
pembangunan bandara
seaports,
beberapa tahun
airports,
terakhir ini di
in the past few years under the leadership of Professor Nurdin Abdullah, the governor.
pengoperasian 2 bandara baru.
We have
Itu
2
sebenarnya
new
membuka
airports
peluang
operating.
baru ya.
This opens up new economic opportunities, which we hope is not just for South Sulawesi, but also for the Indonesian regional area and also to support development in Indonesia in general. Ladies and gentlemen, my
Tema hari ini sangat
students,
menarik dikaitkan
this is an
dengan
interesting theme when related to
kontribusi dan
the
kebersamaan
contribution and the engagement of the young generation in making use of this infrastructure. As we know, Indonesia has a large population, and in total, there is almost 30% represents the young people, the millennials, specifically in South Sulawesi. And with a population of 9 million, it is estimated that 40% are young people. Of course, in the development of great infrastructures such as a railway line, this will provide an opportunity for the young people. So they must be provided with access to skills development so that they can make use of the existence of this great infrastructure. Therefore, we hope that this Paris Summit, which involves researchers, leading figures, and the policymakers, can generate views as to what the young people need to prepare, including the minority groups, people with disabilities, women, so that the development in South Sulawesi and Indonesia can be inclusive and sustainable without ignoring any group. Most importantly, development should provide access and benefits to the young people. On the other hand, the young people, the university students must be prepared with skills development. They must be creative in seeking opportunities to exploit. This is something that we need to review together. And I believe that pair research, which involves the researchers from various knowledge disciplines from 11 universities in both Indonesia and Australia, has made great efforts because the research is focusing on the interests and the needs of the community. So I believe I follow this research, and this is action-based research. It engages the perspectives of the policymakers. It involves a perspective of civil society with NGOs, community-based organizations, and involves the business community as well, the industry sectors, and the public overall. As I said, there are various groups in society who should not be disregarded. For example, women, people with disability, and various other identity groups. Ladies and gentlemen, therefore, I have faith that this pair research and pair summit will generate strategic thoughts, opinions, and far more than usual, because I believe the discussion and the outcome of the research will be supported by valid data and comprehensive data, engaging all stakeholders' interests, and will allow for the young people the opportunity, as the theme is discussing about their access and the engagement and the benefit for young people. Therefore, those of us in higher education who's working with young people feel a great interest in the result of the Paris Summit so that we can continue and collaborate and contribute what the university can contribute, what needs to be done by the government and by civil society. Ladies and gentlemen, have a great
yang dilakukan oleh
digital summit
IIC
on the day 3 held by the Australia-Indonesia Center. I thank you for your cooperation. We hope that the Paris Digital Summit 2020 on the 3rd day will be a forum for an exchange of smart and beneficial ideas for the nation, for the country of Indonesia and Australia. Thank you. I apologize that I'm speaking Bahasa Indonesia because we do have simultaneous interpretation that the committee has, the organizers has provided. Thank you. I'll hand over back to Valerina. Religious greetings, peace be upon us all. Thank you to Ibu Professor Dwi Aristina Palubuhu, who has given her opening remarks and opening our summit today. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, once again, welcome to the Policy Forum, which will be discussing young people, skills, and development, specifically supporting development and the aspiration of the young people of South Sulawesi. As Professor Dwi said, young people play a key role in development in Indonesia, including in South Sulawesi. So according to the law, young people are those who are 16 to 30 year olds, and this is 25% of the entire population. And when the landscape is moving from agriculture to the urban space, the young people will also change. So how can we support their aspiration to achieve their dreams? So the research pair in South Sulawesi is focusing on the development along the railway track, which is going through Maros, Pangkep, and Baru from Makassar to Parepare. This is the first time we have the railway line in Eastern Indonesia, and it's part of the national infrastructure. This will open various economic opportunities for the people, specifically in South Sulawesi, and to take advantage of these opportunities, young people and people with disabilities need policies which support access to information and skill development. So how can we support the aspirations of the young people in South Sulawesi? Together with me, we have panelists who are members of the Research Advisory Panel. First of all, I will introduce Ibu Jana Hertz, RAP member and team leader of Knowledge Sector Initiative. Good morning, Ibu Jana. Good morning. Thank you for being with us. And now I would like to introduce the next panelist, Mr. Andi Darmawan Bintang, Head of Manpower Office, South Sulawesi. Good morning, Pak Andi. Good morning, Valerina. Thank you for being with us this morning. And now we'll introduce the other panelists who are very successful in their field. We have Pratiwi Hamdana, founder and managing director of the NUN and regional operation Gojek, also member of the research advisory panel. Good morning, Mbak Pratiwi. How are you today? Thankfully, I'm good. Thank you for being with us. I would like to also introduce Binar Afilastari, Think Policy Society. Good morning, Mbak Binar. Good morning. So today we'll be talking about young people, so be ready. We'll be waiting for your ideas from Think Policy Society. Once again, I would like to let you know, as Professor Duya also mentioned, that in South Sulawesi, the population is 9 million and 40% are young people. So we do need to raise skill levels and being able to seek opportunities, especially along the railway line in South Sulawesi. So of course, it is necessary to have supportive policy initiatives. So my first question will be for Pratiwi as a young person.
Driver engagement Gojek. Saat ini regional operation Gojek Indonesia Timur juga.
So she's also regional manager in Gojek, and she also employs young people in Tenun. So she's doing a lot for the young people. So what are the challenges and the barriers that you face in your activities? Can you hear me? So based on my personal experience, the main challenge is the perspective of the public itself. So the public tends to believe that colleagues with disabilities have much lower skill levels. Although we know that there are a lot of government and non-government organizations that are providing training for people with disability, as well as the young people. But in the public's perspective, they still think our friends with disabilities cannot compete with those without disabilities. But through the Noon and through the foundation we had, which is Berdaya Bareng, we can prove that people with disabilities have just as much capability as others. People think, oh well, the young people from the regencies, our rural areas might not have the same skill levels as young people from the city. Therefore, having this railway line development, I hope will provide access to young people from the regencies to take part in various activities that are mostly being convened in cities. So that's a public's perception. And secondly, is inequality in access and opportunity between people with disabilities and non-disabilities, and that applies both to the regencies and the city.
Saya ke Pak Andi dulu ya, Mbak Tiwi ya. Oke, ini Pak Andi tadi sudah dijelaskan oleh Mbak Tiwi soal adanya dua hal,
So today we talk about,
serta tadi kesempatan yang dirasakan sebagai tantangan utama.
and so she was talking about the main challenges in developing young people, specifically in South Sulawesi. So Pak Andi, what are the policies of the provincial government for enhancing the skills of young people in South Sulawesi, and specifically those with disabilities? The government of South Sulawesi has actually conducted many measures and policy, and specifically for the empowerment of young people. In South Sulawesi, we have Regional Regulation number 3 of 2018, which in principle is directed towards how to develop the young people. There are work programs. It is a responsibility from both the central government, provincial government, and regency government to direct the young people in participating in development. Every year, we also provide assistance in the context of providing training for them and providing internships. In the context of people with disabilities, we also have a regional regulation from 2016, which specifically is for empowering people with disabilities in all aspects of development, especially for the young people. There's a specific feeling that they feel they have limited ability, so they think about being workers rather than being an entrepreneur. Access to capital is an issue for them. In the context of people with disabilities, my apologies, there's some audio problems. So there's a lack of self-confidence in their abilities. My apologies, there's some audio problems.
Pak Andi mengalami kendala teknis. Kami akan kembali ke Pak Andi bila sudah dapat bergabung. Pak Andi, apakah sudah bisa diteruskan?
Ya.
Pak Andi, can you continue?
Jadi untuk kalangan disabilitas.
So for the people with disability, there's other factors that is a barrier, an issue, because they are able, but because the community or the public feels that since they have disabilities,
Mereka tidak diberi, tanda kutip, kurang diberi kesempatan. Mereka hal-hal yang pekerjaan yang seharusnya bisa dikerjakan oleh yang normal itu dikerjakan oleh normal.
So sometimes a lot of activities are done by able-bodied people and putting people with disability to one side. First of all, we need to provide education, and we need to overcome the barriers that they feel.
Baik, terima kasih
Pak Andy, thank you. I think we understand your message. We'll return to you later. I'll go to Ibu Jana now because Ibu Jana is working in the knowledge to policy translation. So using data to support policy, specifically on young people, policy for the young people. Pak Andi talked about different policies implemented by the South Sulawesi government to provide opportunities to young people and people with disability to develop their potential. In your opinion, what are the policies thus far based on research or are they scientific-based policies? So are they appropriate? Thank you for your question. I think what is important to raise in this forum is the role of the young people in developing policy as well as advocacy for evidence-based policy. So in the knowledge sector initiative, the young people are maybe not well represented despite having several really good initiatives. So we are supporting the Things Policy Society, which is represented today on the panel to train the young people on the process of policy development in order for them to have a voice so they know when they can have an audience or how they can follow the process of policy development from start to finish. Of course, there's a role for research in that. And research is sometimes done separately in the academic world, but there's no consultation in the beginning with policymakers. So we are hoping that research and the policymakers can be connected so that the outcome is truly practical and impactful or has an impact on the appropriate target. For this forum, that's why it's so important to have research being done by the young people. And Madam Rector or the Chancellor explained the important role of university to support their university students to play that role. And hopefully, it's not just research, but rather policy research that is supported and that from the start has interaction. For example, with officials such as Pak Andi, so that the discussion can begin, the dialogue can begin so that the research outcomes or findings can be applied. And there's a good example on our knowledge sector initiative where there's a cooperation between the South Sulawesi provincial government and the local research center regarding the recovery of South Sulawesi economy during this pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. And this also impacts on the young people. So our hope is that the young people have a voice in discussions and policy development. Thank you, Bujana. So Pandi, as a representative for the government, you can accommodate the wishes of the researchers to also be engaged in policy development in the future. Before I go back to Pak Andi, I want to talk to Mbak Binar because Ibu Jana mentioned that this is one of the ways or the organization that has been successful in engaging the young people and so mobilizing young people and policy development. Can you talk about that a little? Thank you, Valerina. I'd like to talk a little bit about Think Policy Society. So there's Think Policy and there's the Think Policy Society. Think Policy Society started quite simply as one of our co-founders just returned from studies in public policy, and she felt the discourse or the training or knowledge sharing regarding public policy is lacking in Indonesia. So she opened a boot camp. I'm one of the alumni of the boot camp in the first cohort. Now we're on the third cohort. So there's a lot of demand actually for this. As we know, young people are part of the government as analysts, as executors, but they do not yet have the appropriate capacity building. So our society have 14,000 followers on Instagram from across Indonesia. And ultimately, to be able, so that we can work better, we have the Think Policy organization. We call it a social entrepreneurship in the area of young people capacity development, specifically in public policy, not limited for government, but for someone like me who works in NGOs in government, such as Tiwi, working in Gojek, but also in government relations, which is also part of our community, our society. And in addition to developing capacity, we provide a safe space to network for young people who are concerned on public policy issues. And that's it, more or less. But from your perspective, so for young people, when we're talking about human resource development, what's your perspective on that? For human resource development policy that the government has, I think is quite good. We appreciate this in the Ministry of Education and Culture, especially for higher education. We have the independent campus. So learning is not just on campus, and that's good. And we see that the government has an employment program, so that's upskilling for the young people. But once again, the challenge is that usually in the ministry, there's a lack of coordination. So there's a sectoral ego amongst the different government agencies or institutions. So the interventions are sporadic. We would hope that it could be more integrated. So the young people used to be children. So usually teaching them and sharing about problem-solving skills and critical thinking is something that, this is an assumption. Perhaps those of you who are researchers can confirm this, that should be taught since primary school or even since kindergarten. So there should be a roadmap for teaching critical thinking, and so we would hope for a comprehensive intervention and not a sporadic intervention. Thank you, Binar, for your reply. I'll go back to Pak Andi. So we heard from the comments from the other panelists. If I may know, what is the priorities from the South Sulawesi government, especially for the development of human resources, specifically for young people? The South Sulawesi government's policy, as I said before, is that we have local government regulation on development, and for the young people, which is defined as 16 to 30 years old, we do have developing capacity in the form of training and internships. We also have training on how they can be self-sufficient, and that's training on entrepreneurship. And the South Sulawesi provincial government provides capacity building for institutions, whether those they are standalone or those who are affiliated with certain organizations. So that's for the National Scout Movement, the government organized youth movements. And this is done through integrated programs between the private sector, the business community, and the government. The central government provides programs which is not just about training, but also providing technical assistance and providing opportunities for contributing to development. So the issues that Binar mentioned regarding the engagement of young people in participating.
Kami mempunyai mekanisme perencanaan sebenarnya yang dimulai dari tingkat rembuk desa sampai perencanaan nasional di tingkat pusat. Namun tentu hal ini memang
and this is something
bisa dimonitoring secara terus-menerus di mana
And this is
tingkat
something that we need to monitor so that the young people feel represented in development. So there should be, there's digital reporting in the context of young people providing input to the government and not just young people, for all society.
Demikian, Valerina.
Oke.
Thank you, Valerina. Very well. But so for people with disability,
Hal-hal yang lebih spesifik,
are there anything more specific? Is there anything more specific that the government has done? And as Dewi had said, there's a perception that people with disability might not have the same ability as
Baik.
the young people in general.
Kalau nggak salah, tahun 2016 sudah
In
ditetapkan
2016,
bahwa setiap perusahaan itu wajib sebenarnya menyediakan sebanyak 2% dari keseluruhan
so from
pegawai
overall, from all the workers that,
yang akan ditetapkan.
so one of there will be requirements. My apologies, the audio is cutting in and out. There should be facilities provided to people with disabilities regarding accessibility to employment opportunities. Thirdly, we have, as the central government has established, there is some assessment regarding the private sector employing people with disability. We are in the top 6 where the private sector are employing, are providing 50% of employment, or 50% of the workforce in the private sector comes from people with disabilities. So to the participants, if you have questions for our speakers, please write these in the chat box or the Q&A. Please state your name, where you're from, your organization, and who your question is addressed to. And I'll go back to Bujana. So we heard Pak Andi's explanation. There's a lot of measures taken by the South Sulawesi government, and especially mandating that there's a 2% quota of employment for people with disabilities. In your opinion, how can we maximize research outcomes with the backdrop of the policies being implemented? Thank you for your question.
Memang banyak sekali penelitian yang sekarang dilaksanakan terkait dengan isu difabel, juga terkait dengan
with regards to, there's a lot of issues, there's a lot of positive action. There's Australia-Indonesia Disability and Research Advocacy Network, which is very active in bringing together researchers in Indonesia and researchers in Australia regarding issues in Indonesia. It's very positive, and there's a lot of research being done with this focus, and there are many policymakers such as Pandi, who's very open to observing or studying the research outcomes to see what the local government or the regional government and the central government can do. So this is a positive development that we've seen, that from that we hope will continue to develop from a KSI perspective. And for pair, so that research issues can be discussed from the beginning, so that the real issues will be researched and that the policy can influence each other. There's tension between the two, but this is a debate that is crucial. And in the Knowledge Sector Initiative, we call it Knowledge Intermediary. And that's a role of civil society as well as community-based organizations to disseminate the outcome research and to advocate to the government. Sometimes there are many key issues, so it's difficult to prioritize to determine what the priorities will be in development. So if there's cooperation between researchers and the government or the policymakers, as well as with the role of the intermediary, there should be a public debate or dialogue so that it's not done behind a closed door, behind the screen, but rather something that's discussed in public. So once the policy is being implemented and it's being supported, the public would be aware of it. Thank you, Bu Jana. I'll go back to Mbak Pratiwi. What is your aspiration to improve the quality and the employment opportunity for young people, including people with disability and women? From me personally, there are several aspirations that I have. First of all is educating about how we are able to educate the public and the employers and convince them that young people especially are friends with disabilities should be given the same opportunities to work or to have a business, as Pak Andi mentioned. Secondly, although I, I, this is the first time that I've heard that it was 2% minimum employment. I thought it was 1% that the private sector needs to employ people with disabilities, but in its implementation, we have not found many companies that are ready to handle this sort of regulation. It is important to educate the employees and employers or the human resources department that they have people with disability have the same ability. And if they're not considered to be capable, there should be training that can be provided both from the government. In Makassar, we often work with the social departments, but we think there are others that can provide training for people with disability so that they have the same skills and abilities so that they can enter the workforce. Those are my hopes, Valerina. So thus far, do you think the policies implemented by the South Sulawesi government is appropriate, is the same as Ibu Jana mentioned? Is it evidence-based? Is it so I've only just employed or collaborated with people with disabilities in the past 2 years. From my perspective, Makassar, there are a lot of organizations or social institutions that employ people with disabilities. But in the Regency level, I'm not sure of the situation, but in Makassar, it's good, it's well aligned, and we want to educate the public and the private sector. Are they ready to employ people with disabilities that have been mentored by government and others? So there's a difference perhaps from a demographics and geographic perspective. So those that are closer to the capital have better access. Correct. So we'll ask Binar before I go back to Pak Andi. From your perspective, do you see the same issues? Are the policies inclusive? Are they involving all the young people, including the young people? Thank you very much. South Sulawesi is quite progressive. They have earmarked, or they have guaranteed 2% of workers, and that's more progressive than other areas. But in my opinion, this is a means to an end, so this is an endeavor for a greater purpose. So the greater purpose is inclusivity. So these figures should not just be met from a quantitative level. We should look at the quality as well. Other speakers have already talked about educating the public, and from my perspective, because we have the regulation, it's been translated into the government budget. The budget is important. There's a gender responsive budget. could there be an more inclusive budget, a more people with disability responsive gender, and making sure that the teaching materials can be accessed by people with disability. So you can't, it shouldn't be like no action talk only, which is sort of slang in Indonesian. So Andy, so once you've heard the explanation from all the other panelists, in your opinion, how does the education and local and international training organizations such as the NUN, and there's a, I think, Policy Society, and then a Knowledge Section Initiative, how can their presence support the South Sulawesi government in human resource development? Please unmute.
Baik, makasih Mbak Valerie.
Thank you, Valerina. I'm sorry, he seems to be muted.
Baik, sudah kedengaran Mbak Valerie?
Can you hear me? Yes.
Baik. Kami mengharapkan.
So we are hoping to have support, especially in mentorship and the policies that we have taken. This is actually part of the public's wish for bottom-up development. But there are some shortcomings regarding information technology that can be developed for the rural communities, because we do need to ensure that they're developing from a digital perspective and in the context not just of training and capacity development for young people and people with disabilities. We hope for support in the provision of equipment that can be used for developing knowledge with field practice. For example, vehicles that can be dismantled and put together again. And for the young people, if they have the aspiration and the willingness to work, we want to ensure that they can develop their abilities so that they can work based on the abilities that they have. And finally, we do hope that our colleagues, researcher colleagues, can contribute in research which is ongoing to provide input for us to talk about what shortcomings we need to improve in developing the young people and people with disability. That's it, Valerie. Thank you for that. We hope that it can be implemented through cooperation with all the different parties. Before I go to other speakers, we do have a question in the Q&A box. So to all the participants, if you do have a question to ask, please type your question in the question and answer column on your Zoom screen, and you can also address this to a particular panelist. So the question is from Muhammad Akbar. I'm Muhammad Akbar from the South Sulawesi Independent Adolescent Alliance. Considering the COVID situation right now, there are many young people who have no employment there, and it's very difficult to gain employment. What is the Manpower Office doing about this? So we have quite meticulous planning on developing the ability of the young people through training and internship. But COVID has been a very impactful situation. However, we do hope that we can rebuild. We are endeavoring to accommodate the young people who have been impacted by COVID-19. And as we know, South Sulawesi, there have been 80,000 employees impacted, and about 40% are young people who have been terminated or are forced to stay at home. And so we're hoping by 2021, we can conduct training both for capacity building and self-sufficiency or independence in creating employment opportunities or doing their own business.
Mbak, sebenarnya kebijakan apa yang bisa kita lakukan untuk membantu kaum muda dalam kondisi COVID saat ini?
Oke, kalau dari saya pribadi, berdasarkan pengalaman saya, memang semua aspek terdampak ya, termasuk dengan.
So all aspects have impacted by the lack of opportunities, but it could be considered as a good opportunity for young people.
Karena kita lihat banyak sekali institusi atau lembaga-lembaga yang menyediakan pelatihan-pelatihan untuk kaum muda, dan itu
this is
dengan gratis dan sangat mudah.
so there's a lot of training that can be accessed freely through the internet. It's a right time for young people to upgrade their skills and ability. So once we have recovered quickly, they're ready and they have new skills so they can compete in the workforce.
Baik, terima kasih Mbak Binar.
Ya, baik. Mungkin senada dengan Mbak Pratiwi ya, karena sekarang kesempatannya kita di rumah, tapi sebenarnya banyak sekali kesempatan.
Although we're at home, there's a lot of opportunities to learn, not just hard skills or to be an employee in a particular area, because we know we're aware of Industrial Revolution 4.0. So we want 21st century skills, critical thinking, ability to negotiate. And, you know, this might be a little bit of an advertisement. We do have modules that can be accessed freely by anyone. So if you wish to learn about this, and there are obviously a lot of other sources. We are also developing policy through the support of the KSI. Thank you, Bujana and KSI. Perhaps these policy recommendations can be released, and specifically in education and in manpower, labor. So thus far, how enthusiastic are the young people to learn to develop their own skills through the programs provided by your organization, by Think Policy Society? It's a high enthusiasm. So the bootcamp itself, once again, thank you to the Knowledge Sector Initiative. The second and third cohorts were supported by KSI. We can actually only have 30 to 40 people in a single cohort because it's intensive learning. There's 16 modules and it takes commitment. So, and it's all done after office hours. So there are full-time workers, NGO employees, government employees. Usually we have 500, 400 or so applicants. We only accept 30 to 40. How do you select 30 to 40? So it's very strict. It's like a postgraduate course selection. So there are essays, and we also take into consideration diversity. So gender, because the third cohort is online, so we are trying to be as inclusive as possible, making sure they're spread out across Indonesia. So that's an alternative that we provide. So it's an online academy, and there's written modules as well. So when we have online activities, usually we have hundreds applying. So we're very happy that there's the young people in Asia are actually very eager to develop their capacity. Very well, thank you, Binar, for sharing your experience. So that shows us that the young people wish to advance, but maybe there's not a lot of opportunities for 500 applicants, you might be able to accommodate 30, so where are the rest are going? So maybe that's something that we all can work on together. I'll go to Bujana. Binar mentioned that KSI provides support for training organizations such as this to allow education opportunities for young people. So what is the background for the support, and how can research institutions to get this opportunity, not just think Policy Society at the noon, but others who wish to get support? Could you tell us how they might do that? Thank you. I'd like to congratulate Think Policy Society because they have developed such an interesting curriculum. So it's very attractive, and there's a long queue. So if I was doing my bachelor's degree, I would be in the queue as well. This is part of what we do at the KSI that I'm very enthusiastic about that. This is where the future of Indonesia lies. If they develop their skills early on, as Binar said, critical thinking, negotiation skills, etc., we can hope that for evidence-based policy, and that these policies would support all the groups we mentioned before. The reason the program that I represent, KSI supports the Think Knowledge Society, they are able to connect theory to practice. So they talk about the process of developing good policies and how to include research in that. They also develop opportunities, and they can hear from experience, and they can learn about real-time issues. They're given homework to research a particular policy issue that is currently being discussed. So the results of their homework or their studies can be utilized immediately, and it's really interesting. I'm hoping that the universities or the companies that wish to invest in the future generation would find that this is an opportunity to do so within some Policy Society, with other programs which teaches theory on policy developments, but also allows opportunities to interact with the policymakers. This can also be done at the subnational level, for example, in South Sulawesi, where we have PAIR at UNHAS, the University of Hasanuddin, and opportunities to interact with policymakers such as Pak Andi and other officials who are open to listening to the opinions of young people. To answer the question from the participant before about the program for developing greater employment, and this is from conducting action research. South Sulawesi has been able to develop action research on the development of the silk industry as part of COVID-19 economic recovery. It is possible that there are other action research that specifically look at opportunities for young people in the economic recovery process. This is a mechanism that the government can allocate funding to research and development policy or NGOs to look at particular issues. And this can be used for developing a specific program. And this is ideal cooperation that we are hoping for, where there's input from the public, there's research, and this can be inform real policy that has a real impact on society. So there's a lot of opportunities to be explored. Ibu Janan, there's a question for you from Anggito Abimanyu. There's a lot of company that has a requirement of physically healthy as a minimum requirement for employment. Can we assume that people who have lesser physical ability can reach the SDG goals in 2030? So the question is, can it be assumed that people who have physical impairments can reach the SDG goals? I can't predict that. But looking at the people with disability in Indonesia, as we said before, they're very capable, but there is some stigma in the general public.
cuma memang harus ada kerja keras.
There does need to be a lot of work to do that in that, and there should be collaboration in researchers and policymakers. So you need to be aggressive in pursuing several targets, but looking at the capacity we have right now, there's no reason not to achieve the targets.
Baik, terima kasih Ibu Jena. Ada pesat.
Thank you, Jenna.
Lagi masuk, mungkin saya tujukan ke Pak Andi.
So perhaps for Pak Andi from Baharudin Abidin,
Maksudnya adalah
I think what he means is currently in South Sulawesi, there's a lot of, this is in English,
tapi kemudian
there's raining and farming. Why don't we develop agriculture as an alternative to promote
di pinggir
rural development?
Nah, ini juga bisa memberikan kesempatan kerja buat generasi.
And this allows, this will guarantee the next generation, employment for the next generation. So is agriculture a priority that can be developed to accommodate the young people? Very well. South Sulawesi does make use of the agrarian area. South Sulawesi is
menyediakan pangan untuk 27 provinsi Indonesia. Jadi kami memang memprioritaskan, betul tadi dikatakan Pak Fahad tadi, memprioritaskan pembangunan pertanian tentu dengan.
And the agriculture sector should be developed using a
di mana kita mengembangkan pertanian tidak hanya berkembang pada pertanian tradisional, tetapi
and it's not just about traditional agriculture, but rather further develop agriculture. So we need to look at value added processing. So I do agree that we should increase young people's knowledge according to the context of where they live. For example, if they are in an area with opportunities for agriculture, for example, in rice, their training should be on that issue. If they're in an area with plantations, we should focus their training on the biggest revenue earner in that area. So I do believe, and our young people should be trained according to the potential in the area, and that is part of our program. My apologies, there seem to be audio problems. So that is part of our program, which is developed according to the local context. Thank you to the speakers. There, we are limited in time, but based on our discussion, I have drawn 3 conclusions. First of all, there are challenges for the young people, and they need support for developing their skills. There's a perception of the public, especially for people with disability, the opportunities that might be should be more supported by integrated policy for developing the skills of young people. Secondly, there's some recommendations or advice. There should be a dialogue between the researchers, people with disability, and young people, so that the policy will be based on real or valid evidence, or there needs to be a role and involvement of all parties, be that government, non-government, and all institutions representing the interests of young people and people with disability to implement these policies so that development can be inclusive and sustainable. So that's our discussion today. So I would like to say, as what President Sukarno said, that give me 10 young people, I will rock the world. We hope that the young people of Indonesia can rock the world. Don't you think so? So we hope that this has been, we hope this discussion will be of benefit to us all. Once again, thank you to all the speakers. We have Pak Andi, Mabina, Pratiwi Bujana, and Professor Dwi who's opened our session today. And thank you to all the participants. And I apologize if we couldn't answer all the questions. We have a 10-minute break before continuing with the research forum about young people and development in South Sulawesi. And the pair researchers will provide a latest update regarding their research findings. And will be moderated by Ibu Helen Brown. I'm Valerina Daniel. So that's the end of our first session today. Thank you for your kind attention, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see you next time. Religious greetings. Peace be upon us all. Stay healthy.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. Giving everyone a chance to have a little break before we begin our next session, which is the discussion with the researchers about some of those issues that were discussed in the policy panel that we just heard. Welcome to the Australia-Indonesia Centre and our panel discussion, and we're going to look at the aspirations of young people in South Sulawesi. Now, if you've been joining us for our other sessions, you would know that we've already looked at the seaweed industry and research into improving productivity and livelihoods in that industry, and also the potential of a new rail line along the West Coast linking commerce and communities to the capital of Makassar. So today, we're going to talk to our senior fellows who are leading the pair research into supporting the development and aspirations of South Sulawesi's youth. And as you can see, that does tie into those other project research areas. Let me introduce you first to our lead researchers. Unfortunately, one of them was unable to join us today, Dr. Arini Suwaso. However, we are fortunate to have with us Acting Professor Wolfram Dressler from the University of Melbourne. Thank you for your time today, Wolfram.
Thanks for having me. Associate Professor Wolfram
Associate,
Dressler.
Sorry. Oh, of course it is. I'm not an academic. I could probably just bestow with you whatever I feel like.
Not a problem.
And Associate Professor and Dr. Wilma Salim from the Institute Technology Bandung. Lovely to have you with us, Pak.
Thank you, Helen. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Thank you. And of course, both gentlemen are senior fellows at the Australia-Indonesia Centre. Now, we are continuing to take questions, so please do use the chat function to write to us if you have a question. And thanks to those who've already sent through questions from our invitation that went out. What I would like to do first is pose a question to our speakers, one that perhaps gives them a chance to tap into their specific areas of interest and expertise. And we'll expand on their answers a little bit later. But just to start off, a bit of quick insight. First to you, Wolfram. What is the most interesting aspect of the research findings so far to you?
I think the most powerful insight is that the youth employment and education transitions that we're seeing in the South Sulawesi align with those happening throughout insular and mainland Southeast Asia. There's variations, but the trends and patterns of kind of youth mobility, education, transition from farming to off-farming livelihoods is very much consistent with the broader kind of youth livelihood transitions and agrarian changes that we're seeing throughout the region, right? And that has a lot of, the consistency that you see there has a lot of implications for policy, because it's not a one-off trend.
Great, that's really interesting, and you know, we can pick up on that later, definitely. And then do you, Wilma, what about you? What are you finding of most intriguing at the moment?
Well, yeah, we found out that there's a increasing trend of youth population in the city of Makassar, but at the same time declining number of youth in the surrounding districts. But then on the other hand, we also see a number of youth unemployment rate in Makassar city higher than in the district. So there must be something that is not right in there.
Interesting. When we talk about youth, I guess it's important to remember that we're talking about people aged 16 to 30. We have heard that South Sulawesi has a population of almost 9 million people. That's the largest in eastern Indonesia. Young people consist of around 40% of that population, and the biggest age group is 16 to 20-year-olds, so a very young demographic. But Wilma, if I can just pick up on your observations, as you say, there is a trend, but and Wolfram has mentioned this as well. But how pronounced is that trend in South Sulawesi, and what kind of challenges is that throwing up?
Well, the data that we have collected so far suggests that there's, as mentioned by Wolf, there's an agrarian change. There's a land use change in terms of the agriculture land into other land use. So that probably, and that happened in the past 5 years. So there's a trend of the increasing number of population in the city, but then the youth unemployment rate almost 10% in the city. So I think there is something like doesn't match here between what the youth is aspired to do by coming to the city, but then there's no job opportunities in the city. At the same time, declining youth population in the rural areas that might be caused by the change of land use from agriculture to other land use.
Yeah, and you know, as you've mentioned, the research found that many young people are living still in rural areas that are undergoing this agrarian change. Wolfram, if I can just go to you and get your take on what that change is.
Oh, well, it's very multifaceted and complex. So I couldn't give you a very definitive answer in terms of what that change is. In terms of kind of youth and gendered experiences, for example, we can say that we're seeing kind of youth employment trends being highly gendered and differentiated in terms of a lot of kind of rural and peri-urban young women getting through high school and finding employment in kind of the service sector, in education and healthcare, right? So that's the professionalization of kind of the young female workforce, which, you know, if you're optimistic, you could view that as employment that is salaried, less precarious, more consistent, yeah, and less marginalizing, and therefore, you know, more empowering for that particular youth sector. Whereas with rural young men, we find, based on our data and indeed in other parts of Indonesia and Southeast Asia, that many are not getting through high school and are continuing on with rural production and engaging in commodity based livelihoods, right? So many young rural men are staying on the land, and if they are leaving, then rather than getting into service-based educations like working in hospitals or with the government, a lot of them are getting into more heavy labor type of industries, like working in plantations, working in the construction industry, making roads, mixing concrete for railways, and so on and so forth. And then increasingly in the coastal domain, engaging in more specialized forms of marine livelihood activities like seaweed, so on and so forth. Yeah.
Right. So many elements there, which is, you know, the work that you're doing is so interesting because you've got to unpack current trends and there are so many layers to that. And on top of what you've just talked about, the different genders going into different roles and industries, the research is also going to look across 3 geographical situations. There'll be inland, coastal, and peri-urban settings. Why are you considering these 3 landscapes as well?
Maybe Wilmar and I can both speak to this. I think first we're looking at kind of the ways in which one form of youth employment in a certain sector connects up with other social and economic opportunities in other sectors, and that in academic jargon is kind of the relational dimensions of youth employment. So we're essentially trying to understand how youth employment in one region connects up with employment opportunities and development changes in another, right?
Yeah, Pat Wilma?
Well, we use the landscape approach because the region is like that. The South Sulawesi has mountainous area, has very vast coastlines, and increasing number of urbanization. So the city of Makassar is more than 1 million population. It's almost 2 million population now. And then the second largest city, Parepare, which will be connected through the railway, is also growing in terms of population. So we trying to portray a better condition of the region that has urban areas, rural areas, as well as the coastlines. Which has different characteristics, each of them. So
yeah, and I think, you know, it's really interesting that that landscape approach is being taken, because thinking about where people are coming from and where they're going to is obviously part of the evidence that you need to make some policy recommendations. And Dr. Wilma, you also mentioned that youth unemployment is high. It's at 10%, and to you this is a little bit surprising. Perhaps could you just explain this a bit more? Why this rate is so high at the moment? What are your, I guess, hypotheses at the moment? Because this is what you're looking at.
Yeah. So the youth unemployment is high, but this is also the trend that is happening nationwide. As Wolf mentioned briefly, in particular, it happened in urban areas, where we assume that because of there's a decrease in the job opportunities in rural areas, or some media reported that there's the trend of decreasing number of farmers in Indonesia nationwide. So probably the young population are not interested in agricultural work in the farming industry. And then they are moving to urban areas, but then there is no fast job opportunities in urban areas. So that's probably what happened here, what we are seeing here in South Sulawesi.
And from either of you, and both of you, what do you suspect is the skill level of the young people who are moving into these urban areas, and how is that affecting their opportunities?
Buck?
Well, it's difficult to answer right now because you know, because of this this pandemic, we are not able to conduct the field work. But so we don't know exactly what is missing in the skill level. But from the data that the statistical data that we are able to collect, suggests that the vocational high school graduates has a higher number of unemployment. So there is a mismatch between what our youth or the South Sulawesi youth attain from the school and the job availability. So this is a very rough idea about what is happening right now.
Well,
I would also add that the attainment of skills is also highly geographically specific. So, you know, in rural hinterland areas, in kind of agricultural spaces, rural young men and women often don't move through secondary school, and so their skills are often deemed kind of quote unquote informal technical specializations in farming and so on and so forth, and are often not given sufficient attention to by policymakers, or they're tried to be skilled up and kind of modernized and so on and so forth. Whereas in more peri-urban areas around the city, you see young women and men moving through kind of secondary school education, getting into vocational training, and increasingly getting through college, university, and then finding those service sector jobs. So there's a bit of a kind of rural peri-urban divide in terms of kind of youth employability and the gender dimensions to it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. How will the trend of young people leaving the farming areas affect the peri-urban areas? Or, I mean, we've seen a rise in unemployment. Do you think there will be other impacts of that? Or what would you hope to be studying?
Yeah, Pak Wilmer, do you want to have a go at that, and then I can supplement what you're saying?
Yeah, well, I think that there's a number of job opportunities will likely be able to be available in either in the city of Makassar or in the outskirts of city of Makassar, and as Wolf mentioned, there's increasing trend of occupation available in construction industry, because this is what is happening right now in terms of the land use change. A lot of paddy field, the rice field or the dry field turn into housing. So in the past 5 years, so a lot of construction jobs available. That's why I guess the people from rural areas with low education level, especially men, they turn to these job opportunities. While for the young women, they attain higher educational level and then try to look for a job in service industries. So I think in the long run, it will create also the change in the structure of the employment in Makassar metropolitan areas.
I would also add that the extent to which rural kind of male youth are absorbed in peri-urban construction and infrastructure really depends on the pace and the intensity of rural outmigration. So in many instances, you will have more young men from rural areas moving out quickly for a particular reason. This might be because of a hazard event, drought, not making farming available, and then moving to peri-urban spaces, but not finding any jobs, or there being kind of low job availability, which renders them kind of a surplus in a critical sense, whereby they don't have employment opportunities and they have to make use of their time in other ways, which can lead to a range of kind of negative social and economic consequences for cities. Yeah.
You've obviously done a lot of observation and recorded as much as you can, given that the constraints on research in that environment. Can you perhaps explain for us, looking ahead, what work you hope to do to identify the skills and education and knowledge of these young people?
Pak, want to have a go?
Okay, yeah. What we're trying to do is, our research team consists of members from Australia-Indonesia and not based in Makassar. So we are going to work closely with probably University of Hasanuddin researchers and some youth non-government organization to help us understand better what is happening in Makassar area and so South Sulawesi in general, in terms of the youth population and the especially with regard to the skill level that we are still trying to figure out. So the partnership will probably extend to the local researchers and some civil society organization.
So getting that on the ground view really, Pak, is essential.
Yes, so we still have less than 2 years to complete the research, and we hope that the pandemic will be over, and then we are able to conduct the ground field work that we have planned to do in the past summer.
Because it sounds like you're getting a reasonably good overview of the migration taking place and the demographic that's migrating, and also some of the gender differences that are occurring. But to really make an impact in this area, it is around identifying ways to help young people gain the skills that they need or find out what their aspirations are. I imagine they're going to be as varied and complex as the group that you have identified already.
I would say so. The group, our group, with Anna, Retno, Uli, and Rennie, we've all been pushing for kind of a bottom-up participatory approach to research because we are social scientists and we rely on ethnographic methods to do our work, which requires us to be in the field. In this case, we'll be working via other researchers from local universities to try to organize and mobilize rural and urban youth in different participatory workshops where they can kind of brainstorm and think through some of their own aspirational goals and the skills that they need to attain them. And then that will all be documented and we'll be troubleshooting them, I suppose, discussing, engaging the various aspirations and skills, needs that they identify, and then relaying this, back to civil society organizations, CSO, and of course, various state agencies to come up with reasonably grounded policy solutions. But yeah, definitely we're pushing for a much more participatory and youth-led kind of action research approach. Yeah.
And does the work that you're doing, will that include the impact of initiatives by the government of South Sulawesi, for instance, helping young people in the areas of tourism or providing some English language training? Will you put that into the mix as well in your consideration?
Yes, as we heard from the head of the manpower agency this morning, so he mentioned that the government of South Sulawesi has also offered several training internships in companies. So we will identify also part of our research. We conduct a policy analysis, specifically the government of South Sulawesi. A program or activities that they offered and how that match with the aspiration of the youth. This is something that we're still trying to find out firmly. What do they need? What do they require? And then has the government programs met their aspiration, met their requirements or not? This is something that still puzzled us for now, but we take into that in our consideration.
And but Wilma, you mentioned earlier about the perception of farming that is seeping into the province as well, and that it's not seen as an ideal career move. And that's one that you're picking up on a national basis. But given the fact that South Sulawesi has a seaweed industry, that it has a strong farming base, that we are seeing more agpreneurs, agtech entrepreneurs, in Indonesia, do you think these are the sorts of trends that might feed into some of those youthful aspirations at some point?
Yes, I would love to see how the image will change with the increasing, the diversity of the agricultural job available in rural areas. If we can change that image or the perception of the youth about the farming work, that is not only like a traditional dealing with soil and buffaloes. So it will probably change the aspiration of the youth in the future in South Sulawesi.
And at this stage, though, it seems more likely it would attract the young men rather than the young women, given that you've already noticed some distinct gender preferences when it comes to roles and aspirations.
That's right. Yes, we are seeing that because young women tend to have a higher educational level. They reach a certain educational level that they prefer to work on. Not on agriculture sector, but if we are able to identify the chains of what agriculture or non-agricultural jobs available related with seaweed industry, as you mentioned, then they will probably fill the job opportunities available from the seaweed industries.
I think one of the biggest kind of gender constraints in agriculture and kind of aquaculture along the coast is that a lot of young women are kind of confined to the margins of the supply chain, production and supply chain of seaweed and agricultural commodity production. So whereas young men and middle-aged men are actually much more integrated and in charge of making decisions and controlling how commodities are produced and flow, right? Therefore, they have more control over the price dimensions, who buys what and who gets the profit, right? So what we're finding both in the rural countryside and along the coast is that many young women are engaged in kind of employment, incremental kind of bitsy employment that is about kind of processing and refining certain aspects of the commodities that are being produced rather than being in charge of key components of the commodity chain.
Yeah.
If that makes sense, right?
Yes.
Which isn't necessarily a good thing for trying to involve young women into farming that is sufficiently lucrative to sustain their family, pay taxes, and to survive on the land and not necessarily get up and move to the city, right? So yeah, I think that's very, very important.
Very important, yeah, because you're also working with colleagues who are doing other projects. One is in the area of seaweed and improving productivity and income in that industry, and also supply chains. So I guess you're also looking at, well, if they can achieve that, what are sort of the more perhaps technical jobs or the jobs that require different skills rather than just hard labor that could keep women in a particular community. Is that correct, or am I making a correct assumption there?
Broadly speaking.
Broadly speaking, yeah. Fair enough.
I wouldn't necessarily use the term hard labor, but kind of integration and greater control over the forms of production on the coast and in the countryside, and that has to do with greater kind of access and use over land, decisions about how land is used, decisions about the types of commodities that are produced, how they're processed in particular, who they're sold to, so on and so forth. Because if all of the decision making is in the hands of the male head of household, right, then typically what happens is that much of the income stream follows a particular route and isn't necessarily redistributed within the family. And with young women, especially when they want to leave the family, they should have certain options for a respectable and lucrative livelihood in their natal village where they grew up, right? They should have that option that exists in other parts of the world. So why shouldn't they have a lucrative livelihood opportunity on the land or on the coast in areas where they were born, rather than having to get up and to leave, right? So the shift from rural production to urban forms of production in cities has many benefits, and it's empowering, but it can also lead to a whole range of constraints negative social and economic opportunities down the way. One of them being the emptying out of the rural countryside.
Another area that I wanted to make sure we touched on was the research that you're doing into the impact of remittances and infrastructure on young people's livelihood needs. And it's been mentioned a little bit, but I think we should go into it a bit more. Why is this important to understanding the youth aspirations and development needs?
Yeah, I'm wondering if Anna is around, if maybe she could chime in to this.
Anna is, of course, one of the associate fellows who's involved in the research on that. Perhaps she can.
Anna, are you around? No.
No. Perhaps you can type something in. We'll wait to hear from Anna. We can try and get in touch with her in the background while I put a question to Pat Wilmar, which has come in, which is a bit of a broader look. But based on, you know, you were talking about, and you and Wolfram were both talking about the trends that are happening nationally. So given that, what are the likely impacts of Indonesia's recently passed omnibus bill to youth employment nationally and perhaps South Sulawesi specifically, if you feel you can answer to that?
Well, let's look at the reason why the omnibus law is passed by the government is that to offer job opportunities. We are in recession. We really need investment to come in to the region, not only in Java but all over Indonesia. So that's why the reason why omnibus law was passed in order to cut the red tapes, especially. So we are hopeful that with the omnibus law, then there will be more investment coming in, and people are moving. I mean, the labor will be back to work with the number of layoffs recently. We really need job opportunities, including in South Sulawesi. So let's see how in the next few months is crucial how the government will implement this law into some several implementing regulations.
And I guess, you know, it's those implementing regulations too where we will see the impact of this significant law in Indonesia. I wanted to also make sure that we thought about how are you going to, you're going to gather lots of information about young people, where they're moving from, where they're going to, what kind of jobs they're picking up, what their aspirations are and what skills they need. Have you had any early indications of the kinds of skills and training that they're looking for? And I'm just thinking of the policy panel that we had earlier too, where they were talking about sort of specific government departments. But is it more around sort of basic skills like computer skills, data skills, or something else? Are you getting any early indications?
Yeah, so in terms of the railway development, last year we had a chance to visit the developer, yeah, which is the government public owned company Kereta Api. They have thought about giving training for the locals. So there's, I think we heard earlier there's a 2% quota for disabled people to work. In terms of for the local, there's a quota of 20% minimum required to offer to the local labor. And the PT Kereta Api, they understood that there's a gap in the skill required to work in the railway sector. So they are recruiting and they're offering training for the some local people to start to prepare them to work once the railway operates.
Okay, and do you think with the railway was another thing we hadn't mentioned, I'm glad that you did, but do you think then we might all see some gender differences around the railway and potential job opportunities and skills and training?
Yes, I see. As I mentioned earlier, that the young women tend to have a higher educational level, and so they probably will be able to fill in jobs related with the desk job, or even ticketing part of the railway operation, which probably they will be able to fill compared to the men. They probably have better talent, I may say, compared to men. So I see there's also job opportunities will be brought by this railway development in Makassar Parepare line.
Cool. And I'm just, sorry, I took my eye off the chat, so let me just make sure that there are no further questions. No, all good. That's great. Means I can ask more. What are the next steps from now? You've mentioned that you want to be on the ground in the province, talking to young people. You've got a certain amount of information so far. What do you hope to do in the next 6 months to further your ideas about what is happening? And if I could go to perhaps Wolfram first and then Wilma.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of different initiatives underway, all of which is contingent upon the COVID context and how that is affecting the health of potential research participants in South Sulawesi. That's first and foremost the priority. So I think we will meet as a team a bit more intensively. We will reach out via PAIR and others to identify kind of local collaborators and to try and find kind of key case areas that are kind of along kind of a landscape gradient from rural, peri-urban and coastal areas. And yeah, then begin to do the quasi field work via, kind of on the ground researchers and to begin the data collection. This will be kind of along 2 or 3 different kind of research work packages. And these are kind of carrying on from the pilot project. So basically getting the research architecture structured up and done in a way that is collaborative and inclusive with people.
And Dr. Wilma?
Yeah, so we have identified several districts along the Makassar Parepare railway line, and then in that district we try to identify sub-district or village that will meet the profile that we are interested in to look at, and so that they will cover the district of Maros, Baru, and Pangkep, Pangkajen, and Kepulauan. But we have to verify that, and then we are actually working closely with other research groups, especially the commodities and the transport and logistics, to identify which village that we can do the fieldwork together, actually. So especially for the seaweed, the communities research group working on seaweed. So we will be working closely on our coastal demography with that research group.
I would also quickly add that it's critical for us as a team to find a way to have or establish a local presence in these 3 regions and certain villages, localities and villages. And that's simply because qualitative research that is about asking questions about livelihood change and family dimensions requires a degree of trust and acceptance. So we can't go in with a really kind of rapid approach, which is about collecting as much information as quickly as possible, and then assume to have the substantive ideas about local livelihood perspectives across different age cohorts. So it's really going to require some careful scoping, consultation at the community level to do this slowly and carefully in order to be able to work collaboratively with local people to get good, solid kind of ethnographic information, right?
That's a good point to end on, and a very important one too. And on that, I'd like to thank both the speakers for their time today and their insights on the work they're doing on interesting but complex issues on the ground in South Sulawesi around young people development and aspirations. I'd like to thank Wolfram Dressler from the University of Melbourne and Wilma Salim from the Institute of Technology, Bandung. Thank you both very much, gentlemen, for your time and observation.
Thanks for having me. Yep. And on behalf of the team, Anna, Retno, Uli, and Rennie as well.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to invite our guest, Kirsten Bishop, to deliver the closing remarks for this session. She is the Minister Councillor for Governance and Human Development at the Australian Embassy in Jakarta. And Kirsten Bishop, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much. Terima kasih dan selamat siang semuanya. First, let me say thank you to Professor Dwi Aristina Bulhubuhu for opening today's session, and to the distinguished policymakers and researchers here today for your valued participation and contributions. And thank you also for the opportunity to provide closing remarks this morning. Australia, through our Development Cooperation Program, does a lot of work to support effective public policy through making better use of research, data, and analysis. Through programs like PAIR, as well as the Knowledge Sector Initiative. I know our team leader, Jana Hertz, was on one of the panelists this morning. We seek to bring together policymakers with practitioners, experts, and researchers. And these latter groups can be from universities or civil society organizations or the private sector. The aim is to talk about development challenges in a way that encourages new thinking and responses for the future. The theme of today's seminar and discussions is especially, and the summit overall, is especially relevant given the COVID-19 context in Indonesia and in fact across the whole world, including in Australia. Young people, we know that young people are feeling or may be feeling that they're facing a very uncertain time, an uncertain future, with unprecedented changes in the way that they go about their learning or look to enter the workforce, not to mention worries about inequality that may have been long-standing. The situation may feel especially precarious for young men and women with a disability on the margins of society, or those who are facing hardship. Food security may continue to concern young people and their families, while the double burden of malnutrition and non-communicable diseases continues to rise. Those in remote locations that lack the same access to services as their urban peers we know are especially disadvantaged. So the research presented today has given us all pause for thought and to consider the specific challenges faced by South Sulawesi's young people. The picture painted today is one of ambiguity and disorientation potentially for young people. Transformation of South Sulawesi's capital of Makassar over the last 20 years has shifted the environment from agricultural to urban space. Infrastructure developments are creating new employment opportunities, resulting in many young men leaving agriculture. And while we've heard that young women are filling education, healthcare, and other service roles. But whatever their circumstances, it's important that young people have a voice in their decisions and in the decisions, the decisions made by government, and feel engaged in the future of their communities. We know that empowering youth helps to ensure the right opportunities are made available and allows Indonesia and South Sulawesi in particular to take advantage of its demographic dividend, the relatively high proportion of the total population who will be at working age over the next 10-year period. So there are pressing challenges presented to us by COVID-19. And I note that we'll hear tomorrow a little bit more about some of the health challenges. But the time is also right, we think, to help lay the groundwork for a more prosperous society, and one that that has the right settings to develop education, skills and training that will lead to better employment outcomes, increased productivity and inclusive growth for Indonesia. We know that women in particular, who are often employed in the informal economy and take on a lot of unpaid caring roles, people with disabilities can face discrimination and barriers into entry into the workforce. So harnessing the economic participation of all groups is going to be critical for Indonesia's economic recovery and for its future growth trajectory more broadly. Indeed, we can't hope to achieve sustainable development unless we bring everyone with us. I hope PAIR's research on human capital development, with its focus on youth, can bring and provide useful insights to help inform these longer term goals and how we get there. Making sense of these changes and what opportunities exist to support and empower South Sulawesi's youth as the region further transforms is an enormous privilege, and one which the Australian government is proud to be supporting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kirsten Bishop, for those remarks. Minister Councillor for Governance and Human Development at the Australian Embassy in Jakarta. It's a pleasure to have you join us today. So the Partnership for Australia-Indonesia Research is working in the province of South Sulawesi to investigate and make key findings that are important to its future and development. So far, we've heard about the role of the seaweed industry, the potential of a new rail line, and how young people need to be considered in the planning for industries and infrastructure. And all those areas are intertwined. This Thursday, we have the last session in our inaugural PAIR Summit, where we talk to the researchers involved in addressing public health and disability issues affecting youth in South Sulawesi, and considering that in the COVID-19 context. We did hear a little bit this morning from the policy panel about some of the particular issues facing people with a disability. We're going to talk about those sorts of challenges more on Thursday. There's time to sign up. You can see more details on your screen now. So take note of that URL and please register and join us for the Thursday discussion at the same time, wherever you are watching from now. I'd also like, I think it's a good opportunity to mention that we have our short film festival still running, in that you can go online and vote for your favourite short film. Now, the Real Oz Ind Festival is a celebration of filmmaking of Australian and Indonesian directors. And the judges have had their say, but the films chosen by the judges are now up for you to have a look at and do your People's Choice vote on. So you have until, you've got a couple of days left. I would jump on there quickly, have a look and vote for your favourite short film, realozind.com. I think you'll enjoy watching them. They're fantastic this year. Thank you though for being with us for this important discussion today about the aspirations and needs of young people in South Sulawesi. I hope it's given you a good idea of the research work being done by PAIR, which is supported by the Australian government. And I look forward to seeing you on Thursday.